Hi, I'm Richard, and today I'm joined with the founders of Gamsa. Introduce us to each one of you and tell us a little bit about what you do at Gamsa and, what made you get that started.
Sure. So I'm James, and pretty much we do everything, right? As a small team of two officially, we do everything from app development to marketing to accounting, right? So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
And I'm Jiwon. We're both co-founders of Gamsa, and we're a husband and wife team. My role at Gamsa, again, dabbling with a little bit of everything, including some development and sales, marketing, customer support. Yeah, small team, so we have our hands full.
For anyone who's watching this who isn't familiar with what you've built, like what is it that you've built and who are your primary users?
In the restaurant space, it's called QSR, quick service restaurants, I believe. And so if you have a busy location and you're short-staffed, sometimes you'll see a kiosk out in front. And so where we come in is basically we integrate Square with devices for such purposes. Yeah.
So we've created a kiosk app that runs on several different forms of hardware, and we've integrated the Square terminal to process payments.
Remember seeing what the terminal looks like. I mean, the whole view of it looks awesome, like very large, tablet for the customer to be able to use, and then you have like the terminal on the side of it. Tell us a little bit more about what it was like to sort of like figure out who your first customer was, like how'd you find that, and like what kind of inspired like building a kiosk for restaurants?
As far as finding our first customers go, we actually had a prototype of a kiosk app. At that point, it wasn't built specifically for Square, and we took it to a local trade show and had it in front of a lot of cafe owners and quick service restaurant owners. And the question that we got often was, does this integrate with Square? And at that point, we had no idea about the Square APIs, about the terminal, nothing like that. And we just kind of said, maybe, not sure. And then about a week later, I was doing some research online, and I did a quick read through some of your documentation, API docs, especially the terminal API. And then I pinged James and said, hey, take a look at this. I think we might have something here that we can work with. We got in touch with some of the Square sellers who asked whether our product integrates with Square and followed through with them. And then we were able to pilot our program.
And so like when you got that first seller, on board and, you had something in front of it, like what were the first things that you learned as soon as like you like fired it up and got them onboarded and you were like having customers try it out? Like what were the first things that you sort of learned from that?
I'd say the very first part was like the menu syncing, right? Because we touted our app to be a no-touch solution. And so any changes you made on the dashboard would automatically show up on the kiosk. But we have to jump through a lot of hoops to get there. And so like everything from like caching on the kiosk side to making sure that the menu syncs correctly from Square's servers to ours. There were a lot of learning lessons along the way. And then also the biggest one so far, I think, has been the Wi-Fi. If Wi-Fi goes down at a restaurant, that's it. There's nothing that works with our integration. And so making sure that the restaurant has a guaranteed network connection, that's been a good one too. But yeah, there's like tons more, but those are probably the two biggest that come to my mind.
And like, so when sellers were like first using it, like what were like the first things that they were asking for like what it could be able to do?
They want automation and no-touch solutions. So for example, like inventory tracking, they want their items to be marked as sold out without them having to manually go to a Gamsa back office and doing that. So we were easily able to do that by using your catalog API, showing that sold out true Boolean. So that made it very easy for us. Loyalty API, that's a very popular request. And text message notification, that's another popular one as well. But if I could add, like going back to the question about what was something that we noticed when we first piloted the app, was that there was a bit of a challenge of sellers having their catalog designed specifically for employee facing, but now we're fetching those categories, items, and modifiers, and suddenly they have to be customer facing.
Right.
So that was something that we had to work with the sellers to find out, hey, how can we make this user-friendly for everyone, including yourself, your employees, and the customers?
Totally. It's actually like a common thing that when talking to developers coming in, even myself previously worked a lot in like e-commerce. And so, my idea of like a catalog is that it's going to be facing customers in terms of like the checkout process. But I think that the way that the catalog was originally designed here at Square is like, this is for you to like manage what you're selling in your point of sale. And so there's a lot of assumptions that come along with that. Like sometimes sellers might have like little shorthands. They don't have images for everything. They don't have descriptions for everything. And so that sometimes it does require a little bit of like coaching for the seller to be like, hey, these are some things that you probably haven't considered yet because, this might be the first time that they're doing that. They might not already have like a website.
It's really been really easy for them, for both the seller and the customers, and we've gotten great feedback. So that's probably the most challenging part for the sellers, getting their menu straightened out to be customer facing.
Going a little bit more on like, when you first got things running, you're not only trying to get like this fully automated, like no touch setup for a seller so that they can just drop one of your kiosks there and get up and running. But what were like the things that you first learned when you had like customers actually like checking out with it? How they like assemble a cart, or like, how you're sort of like pushing the orders like into order manager or something like that?
I'll speak from my perspective and then like feel free to jump in. We just create the order object, shoot it over to your server, and then like you guys take care of it. It gets routed to the kitchen printer just fine, and everything else that needs to be accounted for, right? So it was easy peasy. Going back to that network issue, the number one issue that we ran into, and this was also partly because the location that the kiosk was in had spotty Wi-Fi. But if a customer got stuck in the flow and the network dropped out, then they wouldn't be able to navigate to whatever next screen. And so adding redundancies to make sure that no matter what happened with the network, that the customer would know at least what to do next or try next. Yeah, that was probably, again, the biggest part for us.
As far as the user experience goes for the customers, we did some user interviews prior to even piloting the program. We got a bunch of friends and said, hey, try ordering something and adding modifiers and etc. And that's when we were able to make some changes. I think we talked about the checkboxes versus the radio buttons versus let's create our own buttons and let's code it up ourselves to make it suitable and easy for customers to use. So yeah, we made sure as far as the user experience goes, we tested out.
One of the common things that I've heard previously when, somebody who has like more experience with like say web development and then suddenly start building for like an in-person solution like this is that customers have like a much lower tolerance for things when like they're sitting in front of your kiosk and they're like, why is this not doing a certain thing? Or like the feedback cycle has to be like really quick. And so it's great to hear that you just like tested it out really early on. What is it that you use for like sort of building your app, like at least for the portion that's running on the kiosk? Like what technologies are you using for that? And then we can maybe later talk a little bit about like what the back end looks like.
I never thought it'd be this interesting, but Windows, that's the operating system, right? Just because we wanted to make sure that it runs on any device. Yes, Linux is also an alternative, but we found that the printer abstractions are a bit lacking. So on top of Windows, we have Electron. It's a basic Electron app. Nothing else to it. I can go into a little bit more details about like what we store on like the file systems, but that's our one too.
And like within the Electron app, like are you using like a particular framework for like the UI and everything? Like what does that kind of look like?
On the renderer side, we just use React.
Awesome. And so like it's really straightforward. So like in terms of like bridging the connection between like a kiosk and your sort of back end administrative part, like what does that communication bridge look like?
The back end is humdrum Rails, right? Tried and tested.
Nice.
Yeah, we have a back office for some of the administrative tasks. I used a React Rails gem for that. The kiosk app, by and large, is just a client. It's just a fancy browser, if you may. The OAuth, gets started off in that back office I just mentioned. The user creates a API key, which then goes onto the Electron app. and that's used to authenticate any requests between the client and then our server, right? And so we relay a lot of the requests through our servers first to get to Square, right? I think there's some pretty neat little tidbits there about how we did the caching. I don't want to give away too much of the free or the secret sauce, right? Yeah. But I think that's a pretty cool part, right? You can tell them, right? How we did caching. So caching is, like they say the two hardest things in coding is caching and naming things. And so the way we decided to do caching was every time a person starts an order, we check for an updated timestamp on the menu. And if that changes to whatever we have on the kiosk then pulls in the new menu, right? That's basically what we do to sync any menu changes, right? And then the menu changes, we listen to the webhook events, right? And then so anytime there's a webhook event, we pull the catalog down. We decided to pull the entire thing down. We have a diffing algorithm to look for any changes, any new or deleted items. And then that gets propagated through our database and then fetched again through our database back to the kiosk.
And so are you using like any kind of like of the custom attributes on catalog in order to sort of like indicate which things to display when?
Yeah, so upon the OAuth process, basically we create a custom attribute called kiosk exclude. So for example, if sellers don't want to sell alcohol or some merchandise, whatever they don't want on the kiosk, they just toggle the button kiosk exclude and it's at the item level currently. Yeah, and once they exclude the item, our parsing algorithm just takes it out.
What has like the feedback loop in terms of like, feature development been? I know like it's just the two of you, it's pretty early on, but like how has that sort of process been working and sort of like planning your roadmap and like feature development, and like how does that work with the sellers that you currently have using your kiosk?
I think some of the features that they've requested overlap, so that's how we prioritize. So it's really based on demand. If there's a high demand for text messaging notifications, there's a high demand for receipt customization, stuff like that, then we'll work on those first. Yeah, so that's just based on like whatever they ask us to do and how many people ask us to do it. Yeah.
So for like text message notification, is that like sort of like syncing it with like order status? Like, this is like being prepared and this is like ready for pickup. Tell me a little bit more about like what that feature is and like how you got that working.
Oh, so we haven't built it out yet?
Oh, we haven't built it out. All right, well, tell me like a little bit about like what they're requesting and what you plan
I
on
could
doing.
speak to that a bit.
Yeah.
So one of our customers is a large kids cafe. Parents would put in their orders and they're chasing after their toddler who's playing in this large playground.
Yeah.
And for the seller specifically requested if you could get this done for us, we really appreciate it because they don't want to be yelling out order 86 or order so-and-so. Instead, it's much more ideal for the parents to receive some kind of text message saying that your order is ready.
Yeah.
So in order to have a more broad sellers using our product, like food halls, for example, and maybe even stadiums one day, like we realized that this is a very important feature to have. So it's definitely at the top of our priority list.
Tax exemptions was one, right? It's like, of course, like coming from a developer's background, it's like taxes. Like we don't really go into that realm too like every day. Yeah. So that was probably like on the spot. We were installing our first kiosks at our very first location. Yeah, that was probably like the number one feature that we built out while installing. A quick follow after that, I think, was category reordering. Right? Was that the one that there was one menu abstraction that Square didn't give ordinal numbers for? That was, we wanted to give the users an option to order that, right? And so I think it was a category.
Yeah, and the items as well.
Yeah. So that was another quick follow too. So like small things like that, it's not something that you want to blast on your newsletter, right? But it's something that users appreciate. And so.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the customer experience as well. Like you probably don't want drinks before a large entree or specials and stuff like that. So we wanted to Yeah, and we were able to build it relatively quickly. So that's
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, like that's exactly like kind of what I was thinking. Like when you have a customer ordering versus like, somebody just sitting and, ordering from a person at the register. Person at the register is like, what do you want? And they can just sort of like rattle off what they want. But suddenly when you're presented with a menu, it has to have a certain level of organization to it for the customer to sort of correctly get through the flow and like get the proper add-on at the right stage of like, oh, like, at the very end, like, oh, do you want fries with that? That kind of thing. Right now, you're mostly focused on QSRs, like, but you're sort of hoping to expand beyond that. What are the things that you're hoping to sort of eventually, migrate into?
I thought we could stay on the QSR space for quite some time. There's a lot to expand into. I mean, Jiwon quickly mentioned that, it's like stadiums. That's QSR, right? Yeah. And it takes a lot to build up to that. If you broke off, let's say, into like retail, right? Then we'd have to consider how do we scan barcodes and stuff, right? There's a bit more to build, and so that could be a possibility. But for now, I think we want to stay in the QSR space for the time being, at least. Yeah. Maybe you see something else. Like, do you have any ideas where we might want to expand into?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why we chose Square was because they have such a large presence in like the cafe and the quick service restaurant industry. So for the time being, that's definitely where we want to focus on. We've had some requests for like amphitheaters that need this solution. So larger venues, I think, would be our goal, even within the quick service restaurant realm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that I've sort of learned in chatting with folks who've like worked with different stadiums is a lot of times you could think of a stadium as like this almost like a food court, dimensional business, because it's going to have some places that are doing retail, some places are doing food, it has bars and like all of these different things within one area. I think we've all been to an event where you see like the lines are enormous. Of course, you want to have some other way to be able to order and like move your way through a line.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. It's kind of neat to also relate where we think about the menu abstraction a lot, right? But it's kind of nice to have somebody who just kind of, oh yeah, of course, and we can talk about like the building blocks of what we've worked our way around for such a long time. Yeah, so it's great to finally just be able to talk about like menu abstractions with you. Yeah. Kind of geeky, but.
If you were starting over right now, what would you sort of like do differently in terms of like, say, getting the first version of the app built, or, how like you would try to get your first customer?
Honestly, I know this is kind of like, we're in Square, right? But working with Square has been great. Like, I don't know if you've noticed the payment space. It's pretty cutthroat. There aren't too many people who will welcome you and treat you like you're your guest, right? It's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of cold out there. Honestly, it feels warm to work with Square. At our last installation too, Mr. G's Pizza and Diamond Bar, we were talking about just that. Yeah, it's different from some of the other payment processors that we've had conversations with. Not to say that they don't have something to offer, but it's been very personable to work with Square. It's not perfect, right? But like being able to navigate some of the complex abstractions, figuring out how to put the pieces together, that's been great. And so I think that's what really fast-tracked us to where we are today, right now. So maybe that, right? If we knew any better.
Yeah, I think kind of going off of that is probably not integrating with Square earlier than we should have, because I think we did spend a lot of energy and time, maybe even emotions, like trying to get in touch with other payment processor, other post providers, like knocking on doors, trying to ask them, hey, can we integrate with you guys? But it was like, sign an NDA, I'll get back to you, or ghosted. Yeah. And it was just a lot of time that we wasted. Whereas for Square, it's like, here's our Slack channel, and here's our APIs, open source. Anyone and everyone, you're welcome to use them. If we have one regret, I think that's the regret of like maybe spending too much time looking around. And then if we had started our prototype with initially with Square, that would have saved us a lot of time.
Yeah. I could go on and on. Like, can I?
Sure. That's what we're here for.
So like I mentioned the printing abstraction. We originally started with Linux, right? And we were using cups to send out like print requests. So the one connected to the USB, a serial connection was fine, but getting a print request over a network was nightmarish. I just couldn't figure it out. Well, if you're connected with Square, you don't need to worry about that, right? And so like there were so many other things like that we didn't have to worry about. We could streamline specifically on the most like pressing matters, right? And so that really took a large portion of items off of our roadmap, where we could just focus on like making the kiosk app better, for example.
Was the initial version of that also like the Electron app, and then you later like migrated that to work with Square?
TLDR, yes. We had to build everything, right? How do you reconcile payments? Well, you have to do reporting, right? It has to be user friendly, right? You can't just build something. It has to be nice to use. What else? Receipts. I think there was extra, like for the kitchen printer too. Like we also had to take care of that. It's not much, but
the thing that I was curious about is like when you had to sort of make a decision between integrating with Terminal API or Reader SDK. I started to get the understanding that like the reason that you might have gravitated to Terminal API is like it already prints receipts. But I want to know, like, as you were looking at like what we had offered in terms of like our hardware integrations, what made you like make that decision into what you integrate? I know initially, now knowing that you built it on Windows with an Electron app, obviously Reader SDK is kind of out of the question because it's going to be on iOS or Android. But is that kind of like one of the main reasons why, or is there more to that decision?
that's pretty much it. It's like we print on the kiosk itself. A kiosk usually comes with a separate printer, but that's basically it. It's easy to, well, it was the only option we could integrate with. And so yeah, and it's great. Like you can tap, you can slide in the chip, right? It does what we need it to do. And so
I was personally drawn to the Terminal API just because it's larger, and then it also shows itemization, so the whole order shows up. Mm-hmm. And I also felt like it was a bit more user-friendly too for customers, as opposed the Reader SDK. It's smaller and it's more easier to move around, but the Terminal, I felt like it was better for customers to use it as well. And it looked more similar to the card readers that the public have already been using like everywhere else. So I felt like it was more suitable, yeah.
Well, I mean, seeing it next to like what you have set up for like your whole kiosk, I mean, it looks great. So it's very seamless.
Thank you. Good points.
Well, thank you so much for coming and interviewing with me. It has been great to like learn more about how you got where you are, and I'm excited to see what you have coming next.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks.